Thank you, Farhan. Jerry, your response.
Sure. So first of all, let me kind of address the government issue. It's not that all are bad. It's just governments with bad people are generally bad. And I think that's also emblematic of if you think about a hierarchy. At the end of the day, it's not so much the problem that the problem is not that there's a hierarchy. The problem is that if you have inept or bad managers in the hierarchy, then they create worse and worse organizations, or they apply a Peter principle where in general, if you keep promoting and promoting people within a hierarchy and that you promote them to a level of incompetence, then you end up having only incompetent people in management levels. And that's a terrible way to run an organization. I think Google to some extent solved this problem explicitly by only promoting people to the next level when they've already been functioning well at that level. And that essentially guarantees that you don't end up in this Peter principle where you have inept managers. On the contrary, you end up taking people that are very capable at the level below and are already operating at the level above, and then you put very capable people at a level higher to mentor the people below them. I think one thing that from a cultural perspective that a hierarchy allows is it enables multiple cultures to evolve within a single organization. Because if you think about a hierarchy and you have various branches, each branch is actually allowed to have its own culture and to develop its own culture. Typically in a flat organization, you certainly have an evolution of culture, but that culture tends to be monotonic because if you have too many cultures at the same time, it becomes much more difficult to get things done. And so you end up having an environment where you end up having to hire a lot more people that are very similar and have similar viewpoints because otherwise it would be difficult for them to execute. Naturally, in a hierarchy, each branch of the hierarchy can hire different types of people, and you can have multiple cultures that kind of coincide at the same time. As I mentioned, at the same time, it is a lot easier to scale a hierarchical organization because even if one branch is dysfunctional, it doesn't mean that all branches are dysfunctional. They're somewhat independent in that regard. And you can see this in many organizations, especially even large successful companies have departments that are very successful and very efficient. And in some cases, you even have departments in a hierarchical organization that have a very large fan out factor. To Farhan's point, I used to manage 30 people directly before it became untenable from an individual perspective and you couldn't assign as much attention. But that's why I began to become more of a believer that at some point, in order to scale effectively, you need to have some sort of a hierarchy because Google did start out with a model that used to have a very, very large fan out per director. And it became detrimental to the individual contributors underneath that director because although they had complete independence, they had very little attention and you could give them very little feedback as a consequence. I think in a hierarchy, you have a lot more of an opportunity to have a diversity of different cultures, and you have a lot more of an opportunity to have diversity of management styles. For manager, the most important thing is just getting the management right, because I think Farnaz aptly pointed out that if you have inept or inefficient managers, then you can end up having a very inept or inefficient organization. And so the middle management actually becomes the most critical piece of a hierarchical organization. If you get that right, then you get excellence recursively. And if you get that wrong, then you get mediocrity recursively.